ladies and gentlemen. I will now present some news from the Erlang OTP team at Ericsson. So I will start with a short recap of OTP 27 that was released in May and already presented at the CodeBeam conference in Stockholm. So let's start with one of the biggest highlights of OTP 27. Which was process labels. And the process labels are short descriptions that you can associate with your processes, and that doesn't have to be unique. And they will show up in process listings in Observer, for instance, and in crash reports, so that you get better observability of your system. So let's take a look at this example. So in OTP 26, you can see that we have a TLS sender process, because that we can deduce from the initial function name that is called. But we really don't know anything about it. Is it a client? Is it a server? What is it connecting to? And who is using this, or who is setting this up? And in OTP 27, we now are using these labels. And you can see that the TLS sender process, it's actually a client process. And if you look at the line above, you will see that, okay, this TLS process is connected to www.erlang.org. And if you look again at the next line, we can see that it's actually an HTTPS client that has started this TLS connection, and not, for instance, an LDAP client. All our popular applications, of course, use these labels now, and the labels are available for use for applications too. And of course, in OTP 27, we ditched XML for XDoc, and now we have a more modern look and feel for our documentation. We also polished the documentation quite a lot, and we restructured it. But one of the intents is also that it should be much easier for you to contribute to our documentation. So if you find some part of our documentation that you feel should be polished, so please make a pull request. And the most popular open source contribution for OTP 27, of course, was the JSON encoding decoding library. So big thanks to Mihao from WhatsApp for contributing that. One of the changes that turned out to be the most controversial one, actually, was that we deprecated some legacy RSA encryption functions. So the reason that we did that was that it has a vulnerable padding mode called PKCS version 1.5. And already back in 1998, it was considered vulnerable and somebody broke it. And in 2018, someone came up with a more potent attack against this padding. And at this point, we dropped all default support in TLS that used this functionality. And in 2023, Red Hat came up with even another way of attacking this padding. So we decided, okay, we are going to deprecate these functions. But some concerns were raised about projects using this deprecated functionality. That is notably not the same as modern RSA signatures. And from a TLS perspective, as I said, it's legacy being phased out. But the Erlang Ecosystem Foundation said there's a lot of open source projects out there using these functions. So let's move on to 27.1. And as it turns out, there does exist a padding mode that you can use with these functions that is not vulnerable. So we decided to revert to the deprecation. But we still do not recommend that you use these functions with the vulnerable padding. And one of the use cases that use these functions are JSON tokens. And if you read the RFCs for JSON tokens, they will say, don't use the vulnerable padding. Use the good one. So even if you have an OpenSSL library that has mitigated this attack, it was already broken several times. So I think you will be better off if you can avoid it. Also, our zip module has received some love. So now we support something called zip64 archives, so that you can store a lot more data. We have improved the timestamps so that you can have higher resolution. And we also did some other enhancements so that permissions now work out better. And you know the saying that you can't see the forest for all the trees? Yeah, okay. And this is especially true for dynamically started supervisors and progress reports. Especially if you have dynamically started supervisors that goes up and down all the time and are managing thousands of TLS connections and dumping megabytes of certificate data into your logs. And these logs are really not useful for anything, except for maybe debugging, maybe. So even if you can filter them out with a fancy logger filter, it's not trivial. So we decided that we should log these reports at the bug level instead, so we can get rid of them. And if we had had the privilege to do this from the start, I think all progress reports should have been on the bug level. But we dare not do that for statical supervisors because we might break test cases and tools. So we just did it for dynamic ones where it makes no sense at all. When it comes to our public key application, it implements the algorithm for verifying certificate chains, which is used by TLS, for instance. And there's a custom callback called the verify fun that lets you customize the verification process. And this API will get the decoded certificate and some other information. So in 27.1, we added an argument to this verify fun, or that you can have a verify fun with an extra argument, so that you can also get the encoded certificate to this callback. Raw keystrokes, what is that? Well, it's the ability to read keystrokes as you type them when you're not in initial mode. So this could be, for instance, used if you want to make a terminal application, such as ETOP. And now you're able to do that. And I also like to say a few words about the future. So for OTP 28, we are planning to have something called the nominal types. And nominal types are user-distinguished types, or the usernames are distinguished by the user. So for instance, we could do this example where we have meter and foot that are different types, but they are both defined as integers. Of course, they both compare to an integer, but they don't compare to each other. We don't want them to do that, because if we mix up meters and foots, we can get problems with very devastating consequences. So you can have these nominal types and you can get the dialyzer error if you mix them up. Security is something that we are always considering, and of course we are following what the European Union is doing, because they are creating something that they call the Cyber Resilience Act, and of course it will affect us. And one thing that we already did is that we have enabled private issues on GitHub, so that if you think that you have found vulnerability in our code base, you can tell us about it using a private issue without telling the rest of the world. And of course, we are continuing to try to phase out the INET driver, which is a slow process. But the next step is to have SCTC support for our new socket API. So that's what we're working on. And many years ago, in EEP 19, there was a proposal that we should add something called SIP comprehensions. And it has been a good idea, but it just hasn't happened yet. Since that was quite a long time ago, Erlang has changed quite a lot. So now we have a new EEP that takes in consideration what has changed. But basically, it's the same proposal of SIP comprehensions. So what is a SIP comprehension? Well, I'd like to explain it to you by comparing it to a list comprehension. So let's take a look at the top example. That's a normal list comprehension. And a list comprehension is a way of generating a list from several generators. And then you take the elements from the generators and you combine them in all possible ways. So as you see from this small example, there's quite a few combinations. And if you have a SIP comprehension, you will take the generators and you will zip them together so that you get a lot less combinations. And this example at the bottom can already be accomplished by using the zip function in the lists module. But having it as a comprehension makes it more general and flexible, and you can use filters for it as for list comprehensions. So if you're interested in this, please check out the new EEP and the pull request and give us feedback. And you might know that we have something called a system monitor. And the system monitor could be a nice feature if you want to get some information about your system, like maybe is there a very long message queue? Is there a garbage collecting taking a very long time? But the system monitor we have right now, there's a problem with it. It's a dictator-like. That is, there can be only one. And as for trace sessions, or as for tracing, in 27.0 we added trace sessions so that you could have several tools tracing in the same time. So now we're doing the same for the system monitor. Now you can have more than one. And of course, we're doing more things than that, but that is what I have time to tell you about right now. And there will be more updates in the future.
Thank you so much. I'm just in front of the coffee break for you guys, so sorry for that. But there's actually 2 questions. Maybe we can just sneak them in before we go for coffee. I'll just read them. With the update to the documentation's appearance, have you noticed an increase in access? Do you have any of these numbers?
Sorry, any increase?
Any increase in access to the documentation have you even access to these statistics? I think that's a question here.
I'm not on the top of my head, no. Sorry, but maybe we could try to find out.
Yeah.
Make a blog post about it or something.
Let me do one more before we go to coffee. Any intention to expand the nominal types into a full units of measure system?
That would be a question for Isabel. But I will bring that question for her, and maybe we could answer it in the chat or something later.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I don't want to take more time.